Alan Marks from Harrison Spence, and you've been receiving our emails either for the last few months or the last couple of years, and thank you for reading those. Today we're going to do something slightly different. We're going to have a conversation with a friend of mine who's a senior partner at Foot Anstey. His name's Duncan, Sykes, and we're going to be talking about something that worries both Duncan and I for many companies, which they think they've got things covered, or they haven't even started to get things covered, and it's under the guise of corporate governance, but it's really important. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce Duncan. Hello, Duncan.
Hello, Alan. Nice to speak to you this morning.
Nice to speak to you. So would you like to give us a little bit of background on what we mean by planned and unplanned exit events?
Yes, planned events tend to be controlled. Parties tend to agree the price, and everyone is in agreement on the best way forward. Planned events could be considering shareholder exits, potentially by way of buyback or trade sale. Different shareholders may have different exit timelines. Consideration can be given to those. And basically, it's a way of managing it in a controlled way. Unplanned is the opposite. You can have an unplanned exit for good reasons. You get an offer out of the blue, which is an acceptable price. But sadly, in this current environment, you can get unplanned exits for bad reasons. One is the financial difficulty that many businesses are suffering at the moment. Potential drops in recurring income can lead to strains on the shareholders and the board, and can lead to forced sales. And sadly also, there is the possibility of death or incapacity at the moment, which we're obviously all aware of, and that can cause some real issues with the estate of the deceased needing liquidity, and often the principal asset of the deceased being shares in the illiquid company. And that can then cause tensions between the remaining shareholders needing to raise monies in a financially difficult climate to buy out the shares of the deceased and give the liquidity to the estate, and that can cause some real issues.
So that's really helpful, thank you. So from what you're saying, many company directors may find themselves in a position where they're not prepared or able to meet the liabilities should something unforeseen or unplanned occur. Can you give me a couple of examples, something where it's actually happened, or it makes it real for people?
Yeah, sure. Often the real issues come when there is documentation in place. People set up a shareholders agreements and articles when they often form a business, but they don't tend to look at it regularly or renew it. And also, people can put in place life insurance with cross options sat between different shareholders, so that when the shareholder dies, the monies go to the remaining shareholders, who then have an option to purchase the shares of the deceased. Now, that's all well and good in practice, but often what we see is that the life insurance companies produce typical cross-option agreements, and parties don't take the proper advice at the time, sign them, and unwillingly enter into obligations, which I've seen, where the surviving shareholders are contractually obliged to buy out the deceased shareholders' shares from the estate at full market value, even if the life insurance policies don't generate enough money to pay it. And that can cause real issues, because then there's a contractual obligation on the surviving shareholders, and the only way they can meet that is for the company themselves to essentially borrow money up to the hilt, which is really difficult at the moment, to buy the shares out, leaving them in a really stretched position. And of course, if it's really extreme, they can't borrow the money, then that can lead them into real financial strain. And I have seen it happen.
It's interesting, because many people watching this may think that they've got this covered, but actually, without doing their own job on themselves, doing a review of themselves on a regular basis, they could end up being in a position, A, where the paperwork is onerous by the way it's been written, and B, the liability is there and they have to meet it, and C, the value is at a wrong level because it was done many years ago and not been updated as the business has grown.
Absolutely. It's really critical. I mean, in some cases there's no documentation at all, in which case the company's articles of association need to be looked at to see what the provisions are in them, often they're bog standard and don't really deal with the situation. So you can then have a situation where you've got an estate that's desperate for money and a remaining shareholder that needs to tidy things up, but without the funds and without the right mechanism. Or alternatively, you get the situation where there is documentation in place, but as you alluded to, it's really important you do regular valuations to make sure that the life insurance proceeds are going to be adequate to cover the death of the deceased. And if not, and if you've got one of the shareholders as a principal shareholder of a significant stake, life insurance isn't the best way forward anyway, necessarily, in which case you need to be looking at a mechanism for giving time to allow a controlled trade sale exit and potentially giving a small amount of money to the estate in the meantime by way of giving it some liquidity. So there's lots of things to discuss. It just needs, regularly looking at and looking at documentation, and importantly, looking at valuations and, agreeing the right mechanism and right valuation basis, because there's a huge difference. And Alan, that's something that I know you do on a regular basis. Perhaps just talk us through some of the pitfalls and what you see there.
Well, yes, we do a lot of valuations for lots of different reasons, but when we're doing valuation for internal share sale and purchase, or in cases like this where unfortunately someone's death has occurred in a business, it does cause problems because there rarely is the correct documentation, or as you say, if there is documentation, it doesn't marry up with the real value of the business. Valuations do have different values, whether it's an open market sale or an internal sale, and certainly a forced sale, fire sale, which is what is an expression many people have heard, would have a reduction on that. So getting the values right and having an agreed valuation method, once drawn into a document, could be at least easily updated on a regular basis, quite simply by the company themselves, without having to pay for a valuation afterwards, with getting a baseline in place. So I think we've covered off what we wanted to talk to people about today, and we've both agreed that if anybody would like a no obligation further conversation with either yourself or myself, that we're more than happy to do that, or we can do a three-way meeting on Zoom, because that seems to be what we spend our lives doing these days, is all on Zoom. And we don't have to do it in fancy dress apparently, so that's okay. So what's going to come up afterwards is our contact details, and if anybody watching wants to look at it, get in touch, please do, and let us know. Many thanks, Duncan, for your time today. I really appreciate that, and we look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Pleasure. Thanks, Alan.